March 4th, 1945. 1340 hours. Number 1 Mechanical Transport Training Centre, Camberley, Surrey. Second Subaltern Elizabeth Windsor lay on her back beneath a 3-ton Bedford truck, wrench in hand, oil streaking her uniform sleeve. Above her, the truck's engine dripped coolant from a cracked gasket she was replacing. Standard maintenance work that every ATS mechanic learned during training. Her service number was 230873. Her fellow trainees knew her as Elizabeth, or occasionally Windsor, when instructors called the roll. The newspapers called her Princess Auto Mechanic. German intelligence officers, reading intercepted reports, called it propaganda that couldn't possibly be true. But it was true. The heir presumptive to the British throne, first in line of succession, future Queen of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms, was lying in engine grease, performing routine truck maintenance alongside 23 other young women learning to keep Britain's military vehicles operational. She tightened the last bolt, slid out from under the chassis, and stood to wipe her hands on a rag already black with accumulated grime. Her instructor, Sergeant Major Collins, checked her work with the same critical eye he applied to every trainee. No deference, no special treatment, just professional assessment of whether the repair met standards. Gaskets seated properly, ma'am? Yes, Sergeant Major. Torque specifications followed? Yes, Sergeant Major. Right then, start her up and check for leaks. Elizabeth climbed into the driver's seat, turned the ignition, and listened as the engine caught and settled into steady idle. She returned to inspect the repair. No leaks, no drips, gasket holding properly. Standard work, competently executed, exactly like the 50 other repairs she'd performed during her 5 months of training. Nothing exceptional about the work itself. What was exceptional, what German propaganda ministries insisted must be fabricated, was that British royalty would do this work at all. The decision. The request had come in February 1945, during the war's final year, when Britain had been fighting for over 5 years and every family had made sacrifices. Princess Elizabeth, 18 years old, had watched her nation mobilize completely. Women worked in factories manufacturing munitions. They drove ambulances through bombing raids. They operated anti-aircraft batteries defending cities. They farmed land to maintain food production. They served in auxiliary forces, supporting every branch of military service. Elizabeth had contributed through ceremonial duties, visiting troops, touring bombed neighborhoods, broadcasting messages, encouraging British youth. But she'd grown increasingly uncomfortable with purely symbolic service, while women her age performed essential war work. She'd approached her father, King George VI, in his study at Windsor Castle. The conversation was brief and direct. I wish to join the ATS, Papa, properly. Not as honorary colonel or patron, as enlisted trainee learning to drive and maintain vehicles. The king had anticipated this request. His daughter had mentioned it twice before, but he'd deflected, citing security concerns and constitutional complications. Now, with victory approaching, but war still demanding everything Britain could give, further deflection felt dishonest. The cabinet will object, so will the Archbishop. Mother will have concerns about propriety. I know, but every woman my age is serving. I cannot stand apart anymore. It's not right. The king studied his daughter, intelligent, determined, already showing qualities that would define her eventual reign. He understood her reasoning. More importantly, he agreed with it. Very well, but you'll receive no special treatment. Same training, same standards, same expectations as any other recruit. If you cannot meet requirements, you'll be discharged like anyone else. I wouldn't want it any other way. The arrangements were made quietly. Service number assigned, training schedule established, uniform issued, standard ATS khaki, properly fitted, but otherwise identical to every other trainee's kit. No special accommodations beyond security detail that would remain unobtrusive. On March 1, 1945, Second Subaltern Elizabeth Windsor reported to No. 1 Mechanical Transport Training Center to begin 5 months of instruction in vehicle operation, maintenance, and repair. The training. The Women's Auxiliary Territorial Service had been established in 1938 to provide support roles that would free men for combat duties. By 1945, over 200,000 women served in the ATS, performing everything from clerical work to operating anti-aircraft equipment. The Mechanical Transport Section trained women to drive and maintain military vehicles. Essential work as Britain's armed forces depended on thousands of trucks, ambulances, and light vehicles that required constant maintenance and skilled drivers. Elizabeth's training cohort included 23 other young women from across Britain: factory workers' daughters, shopkeepers' daughters, farmers' daughters. Ages ranged from 18 to 22. Educational backgrounds varied from basic schooling to university attendance. What they shared was willingness to serve and determination to master complicated mechanical systems. The instructors treated Elizabeth exactly as they treated every other trainee: firmly, professionally, with high expectations and no tolerance for inadequate performance. Sergeant Major Collins, chief instructor, established ground rules on the first day. You're all the same here, same standards, same treatment. Some of you will wash out because the work's too hard, or you can't meet requirements. That's fine. Not everyone's suited for mechanical work, but if you make it through, you'll be proper army drivers and mechanics who've earned your qualification. No shortcuts, no favoritism. Clear? Elizabeth appreciated this approach. She'd specifically requested no special treatment, and she received none. When her engine timing was off during week 3, she redid the work until it met specifications. When she failed her first night driving test because she misjudged clearance in blackout conditions, she repeated the test the following week. When she struggled with carburetor adjustment, she stayed late practicing until muscle memory replaced conscious thought. Her fellow trainees were initially uncertain how to behave around her. The awkwardness lasted perhaps 3 days before shared work created natural camaraderie. She was Elizabeth to her cohort, friendly but not overfamiliar, competent but not pretentious, willing to help others but not above accepting help when she struggled with something. Joan Thompson, fellow trainee from Manchester, recalled the experience in a 1995 interview. First day, we were all terrified about how to act around her. By week 2, she was just another mechanic getting engine grease under her fingernails. She'd ask me about carburetor settings. I'd ask her about ignition timing. We were colleagues. The only difference was sometimes photographers showed up, but she ignored them and got on with the work. The German response. German intelligence officers monitoring British media observed Elizabeth's ATS service with mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. The initial assumption was propaganda, elaborately staged photographs designed to boost morale by pretending the princess was serving. Goebbels's propaganda ministry prepared counter-narratives emphasizing the photographs must be fabricated or that Elizabeth was merely playing at service while receiving special treatment. But as more photographs appeared, as details accumulated about her training schedule and qualification standards, as eyewitness accounts from trainers and fellow recruits confirmed genuine service, German assessments shifted. Intelligence reports sent to OKW, German High Command, documented the situation. British Princess Elizabeth has completed mechanical transport training with Women's Auxiliary Territorial Service. Multiple independent confirmations indicate genuine service, not ceremonial position. Qualified as driver and mechanic per standard requirements. Represents continuation of British royal family's policy of visible wartime participation. The reports noted this with strategic concern. British royal family's refusal to evacuate, their continued presence in bombed London, their direct military service, all of this demonstrated national unity that contrasted sharply with German leadership's distance from civilian suffering. Wehrmacht officers who'd studied British psychology understood the implications. General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, reviewing intelligence summaries, reportedly remarked, "The British King drives through London's ruins to visit his people. His daughter repairs trucks in the army. Meanwhile, our leadership hides in bunkers giving orders. This is why they will never surrender. Their leaders actually lead." For German propaganda, Elizabeth's service created uncomfortable questions. Nazi ideology emphasized hierarchy, superiority, distance between leaders, and led. The British were demonstrating opposite philosophy, that leadership meant shared sacrifice, that titles didn't exempt anyone from service, that royalty working as mechanics showed strength rather than weakness. Goebbels attempted counter-propaganda emphasizing German women's roles in supporting the Reich, but the messaging felt hollow compared to photographs of British princess actually working on truck engines. The contrast was devastating. German leadership preached about German superiority while remaining distant from their population's suffering. British leadership quietly served alongside their people, the royal family at war. Elizabeth's service exemplified broader pattern of British royal participation in the war effort. King George VI had remained in London throughout the Blitz, despite government urging to relocate to safer locations. When Buckingham Palace was bombed 9 times between 1940 and 1945, he'd insisted on staying. The king visited bombed neighborhoods daily, toured defensive positions, inspected troops, and maintained visible presence that demonstrated the Crown shared civilian risks. Queen Elizabeth, later the Queen Mother, had refused evacuation repeatedly. When officials suggested sending the princesses to Canada for safety, she'd given response that defined British royal family's wartime posture. "The children won't leave without me. I won't leave without the king, and the king will never leave." After Buckingham Palace's first bombing in September 1940, the Queen remarked, "I'm glad we've been bombed. It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." This wasn't callousness. It was recognition that shared suffering created shared purpose, that royal family couldn't ask Londoners to endure bombing while remaining safely removed themselves. Prince Philip, whom Elizabeth would later marry, served as Royal Navy officer throughout the war. He'd seen action at the Battle of Cape Matapan, served on destroyers in the Mediterranean, and participated in Operation Torch. His service was genuine combat duty, not ceremonial position. The Duke of Kent, the king's brother, had been killed in 1942 when his RAF transport crashed in Scotland during operational flight. Royal blood didn't provide immunity from war's dangers. This pattern, royal family serving, suffering, risking alongside their people, created profound effect on British morale. It validated everyone's sacrifices by demonstrating that even those born to privilege understood duty required genuine service. The qualification. Elizabeth completed her training in April 1945, passing both written examinations and practical tests. She passed with scores that placed her solidly in the middle of her cohort. Not outstanding, not struggling, just competent. Exactly what she'd hoped to achieve. Qualification earned through genuine effort, not given through deference to rank. Sergeant Major Collins signed her qualification papers with same matter-of-fact professionalism he showed every successful trainee. Second Subaltern Windsor qualifies as Junior Commander, Mechanical Transport. Demonstrates adequate competence in vehicle operation and maintenance, suitable for assignment to Motor Transport Company. The certificate, identical to certificates issued to every other qualifying trainee, went into her service file. No special notation about royal status, just standard documentation that she'd met requirements. Her fellow trainees celebrated together. Small, informal gathering after the final examination, cups of tea and biscuits, congratulations all around. Elizabeth was one of 17 from the original cohort of 24 who'd qualified. 7 had washed out or been reassigned. Normal attrition rate for mechanical transport training. Joan Thompson remembered. We'd worked hard together, helped each other through difficult bits, celebrated when we passed tests. At the end, she was just another qualified mechanic. We were proud of that, not because she was princess, but because she'd done the work properly and earned it like everyone else. The symbolic power. Elizabeth's ATS service became one of the most powerful symbols of British wartime unity, not because of anything she said or any propaganda about it, but because of what the photographs showed. Royalty performing ordinary work competently and without complaint. The symbolism worked on multiple levels. National unity. If Princess could perform manual labor, then class distinctions mattered less than shared purpose. Everyone's contribution was valuable. Female capability. Women could master complex mechanical work traditionally considered male domain. Elizabeth's competence validated all women's wartime technical contributions. Moral authority. British leadership practiced what they preached about sacrifice and service. This wasn't abstract ideology, it was lived reality. Contrast with enemies. Nazi leadership remained distant from their population's suffering. British leadership shared it. This fundamental difference revealed which system genuinely valued their people. The impact extended beyond Britain. Resistance movements across occupied Europe saw photographs of British princess working as mechanic and recognized that Britain fought for principles it actually practiced. Allied nations noted the symbolism approvingly. Even neutral observers acknowledged it demonstrated democratic civilization's moral strength. For British population, enduring 6th year of total war, Elizabeth's service provided tangible evidence that their sacrifices weren't demanded by distant leadership, but shared by everyone, including those born to highest privilege. That validation mattered profoundly when rationing was strict, bombing continued, and victory remained uncertain. The aftermath. Victory in Europe came on May 8, 1945, VE Day. Elizabeth, still in uniform, requested permission to join the celebrating crowds in London. The King granted permission, and on the evening of May 8th, Elizabeth and her sister Margaret slipped out of Buckingham Palace with a small group of guards and joined the massive crowds celebrating in the streets. For a few hours, she was anonymous, just another person in uniform celebrating the end of the European War. Years later, she would describe that evening as one of the most memorable of her life. We walked miles through the crowds, laughing and cheering with everyone. They had no idea who we were. We were just part of the celebration. Exactly what I'd wanted during the war, to be part of everything, rather than separate from it. Her ATS service ended shortly after VE Day, but its impact continued. When she became Queen in 1952, she retained her mechanical knowledge, occasionally surprising officials by discussing vehicle specifications or diagnosing engine problems. The competence she'd earned as teenage mechanic remained throughout her life. More broadly, Elizabeth's wartime service established precedent for British royal families' continued active military participation. Her children and grandchildren would serve in actual military roles, not ceremonial positions, but genuine service requiring qualification and competence. The pattern she established became tradition. That royal status didn't exempt anyone from service. That privilege required genuine contribution. That leadership meant participating rather than observing. The German prisoner's view. Among the many stories from Elizabeth's ATS service, one stands out for its perspective from the other side. Hauptmann Werner Schneider, captured in April 1945 and held at POW camp in Yorkshire, recalled being shown British newspapers by guards. One featured photograph of Princess Elizabeth in ATS uniform working on truck engine. "We gathered around the photograph in disbelief," Schneider remembered in 1988 interview. "Our guards were amused by our reaction." One explained, "She's been training as mechanic for months, qualified properly, same as any other ATS member." We couldn't process this. In Germany, leadership families remained distant from common work. Here was heir to British throne, lying in engine grease, performing manual labor. One prisoner said, "No wonder we lost. Their princess fixes trucks while our leadership hides in bunkers." That comment summarized everything wrong with Nazi system. The distance between leadership and people. The hollow propaganda about superiority. The fundamental dishonesty about what leadership actually meant. The British princess teaching us more about genuine strength than all our ideology lectures ever did. This reaction, repeated among thousands of German prisoners who saw the photographs, demonstrated the power of Elizabeth's service. It wasn't propaganda because it was true. It wasn't staged because the competence was real. It represented genuine democratic principle that leadership participated rather than commanded from distance. The closing. Years later, as Queen, she would sometimes tell visitors about her ATS training, not boastfully, but matter-of-factly, describing it as valuable education that taught her more about her nation than any formal instruction could provide. "I learned what Britain was fighting for," she'd say, "not for empire or glory, but for the principle that everyone matters, that everyone contributes, that duty isn't abstract concept, but concrete work requiring genuine effort. I learned it by working alongside other women doing essential work that kept our forces operational. That education was worth more than anything palace life could teach." The photographs remained, archived images of young woman in uniform lying beneath truck chassis, hands competent with wrench, expression focused on task requiring completion. Not propaganda, not performance, just genuine service, performed competently, contributing modestly but meaningfully to national effort. German generals hadn't believed it could be true, that British princess would perform manual labor, that royalty would work alongside common citizens, that heir to throne would get engine grease on her uniform. Their disbelief revealed everything wrong with authoritarian system that separated leadership from people. The British had proven something fundamental, that genuine strength included humility, that real leadership required participation, that civilization meant everyone contributing regardless of birth or status. The princess working as mechanic wasn't weakness. It was demonstration of democratic principle that made Britain worth defending. The grey English morning when Elizabeth completed her final training, qualified as competent mechanic, and prepared to continue serving in whatever capacity was needed. That morning showed what Britain fought for more clearly than any propaganda could express. everyone serving, everyone contributing, everyone part of shared effort. Even princesses repaired trucks, especially princesses repaired trucks, because that's what wartime Britain demanded and what genuine leadership provided. Service without exemption, contribution without complaint, duty performed competently regardless of title. The Germans couldn't believe it. The British simply did it. And in that difference lay everything that mattered about why some nations endure while others collapse. The willingness of leadership to serve alongside rather than command from distance, to work rather than merely direct, to earn respect through competence rather than demand it through rank. The truck engines Elizabeth repaired ran smoothly. The qualification she earned was genuine. The symbolism was powerful precisely because it wasn't symbolic. It was real service, real work, real contribution from someone who could have remained distant but chose instead to participate. That choice defined Britain's wartime character more eloquently than any speech could express.